Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Google Hangout in preparation for the 2016 Jon C. Dalton Institute on College Student Values. We are broadcasting live from Florida State University with the sponsorship of the Character Clearinghouse. My name is Chunoo, and I am a third-year PhD student in the higher education program at FSU. And I'm joined here today by Mr. Josh Davis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Davis, and I serve as the Associate Editor of the Character Clearinghouse, and I am a second-year master's student here at Florida State University.
Thanks, Josh. We are overjoyed today to be interviewing Dr. George Koo, who, in addition to being one of the most well-known, well-respected, and most often cited authors and researchers in higher education, will also be a keynote speaker at the 2016 Dalton Institute. Welcome, Dr. Koo.
Well, Dee and Josh, I'm delighted to be with you, and I hope the listeners find our conversation informative.
For those who might not be familiar with Dr. Koo's resume, he is the director of the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment and founded the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. He is adjunct professor at the University of Illinois and the Chancellor's Professor Emeritus at Indiana University. The founder of IU Center for Post-Secondary Research and the National Survey of Student Engagement, Dr. Koo received a BA from Luther College, MS from St. Cloud University, and PhD from the University of Iowa. He has over 400 publications about student engagement, assessment, institutional improvement, and college and university cultures, and has consulted for over 350 colleges and universities around the world. In addition to his 2008 High Impact Practices and Ensuring Quality, and Taking High Impact Practices to Scale in 2013, he is probably best known, at least among us graduate students, for Student Success in College, Creating Conditions That Matter from 2005 and revised in 2010, as well as piecing together the Student Success Puzzle, Research, Propositions, and Recommendations from 2007. His latest book, Student Learning to Improve Higher Education, is less than $40 on Amazon right now and only has 20 copies left in stock. So if you are looking for something to read over the holidays, do not hesitate to pick up a copy today. In addition to his 10 honorary degrees, he has also received the Robert Zemsky Medal for Innovation in Higher Education from the University of Pennsylvania, Indiana University's Tracy Sonborn Award, and the 2014 President's Medal for Academic Excellence. At this year's annual ASH conference in Denver, he was also awarded the Howard Bowen Distinguished Career Award, the organization's top honor. Sir, I am officially out of breath. After doing that introduction.
You didn't mention that I was elected vice president of my fifth grade class.
He was also elected president of his fifth grade class. So far be it from us to leave out that honor as well.
Thank you. It must have fallen off the V.
So for those of you who might have participated in our Hangouts in the past, you may remember that we are also taking questions from Twitter using the hashtag DaltonSpeaker16. But while we wait for those to start coming in, we have some questions already prepared. Dr. Koo, are you ready to get started?
I am ready.
Excellent. So many people are familiar with some of your earlier work, including Student Success in College, which graduate students and others from all over the country and all over the world have used as a resource. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into higher education?
Yeah, I'll do that, but I just want to make a comment about Student Success in College. That Project Deep, as we called it, was still is a career highlight for me. We had a terrific research team, I think 22, 23 people, and the project, we intended it to be useful. That is, institutions would actually learn some things about their own work and from promising practices elsewhere. I was in Saudi Arabia last week, where as part of my participation in their second annual international conference on assessment was an interview about student success in college, and I was reminded that book was translated into Arabic shortly after the first edition appeared. I don't know how many copies have been sold, and I'm glad to know there are just a few left on Amazon, so people ought to get those holiday gifts ready. But how I got into higher ed was, like many other people, it wasn't a mistake, but it certainly wasn't planned. I was going to be a high school teacher and coach. Those were my role models growing up. I'm a first-gen college student. But I was offered a job to work in admissions as an admissions officer for my alma mater, Luther College. And that happened in the spring of my senior year when I was interviewing for teaching jobs. And I thought, what could be better? Mostly because the college provided a car. That was the major perk. But as I got into the work, I became a college junkie, really. And because of the traveling with other admissions people, I got to learn a lot about a number of places that were very different than the institution I attended. The other trigger was that the institution, Luther, back in those days, believe it or not, allowed me to go to school during the summers and paid tuition and so forth. So I pursued a master's degree, which candidly I had never intended to do. There's a long story behind that, but the fact that I was working now in higher ed and I was around people with advanced degrees and the institution supported me doing it, well, that's how I got to St. Cloud State. So in a sense, the rest is history. I grew tired, frankly, physically tired of the admissions work, not intellectually, but physically tired, and my brain began to work, and I was very interested in doing additional studies, and as a result, applied and was accepted at the University of Iowa, where I had a chance to do some additional research and work with colleagues and did some teaching. In fact, I had a teaching stint for a year in the College of Dentistry at all places at the University of Iowa. In fact, one of my first publications, the second, I think, appears in the Journal of Dental Assistants, something like that. So I have had, if you go way back and look at my publications list, you'd say, where did this guy come from? And did he have no clear idea of what he was interested in? But what happened to me was I began to write about the things I was doing. So in virtually every grad assistantship I had, I wrote an article and somehow got them published and got a couple of articles out of the dissertation. And as I was finishing my degree, the best prospect for me was, in fact, seek an academic appointment, a professorship, which I did. So that's a long way around the barn, perhaps, but there were a number of circumstances that appeared, and not necessarily in random order, but as some people say, you gotta identify opportunities when they come along and choose which windows that they're opening are worth, or doors opening that are worth walking through. So I was lucky in that regard.
Thank you.
Dr. Koo, it's definitely interesting hearing about your progression through higher education. Now, much of your work centers on student engagement. Can you talk about how you have seen the ways in which college students engage on their campuses change in the years you have been studying them? And does engagement still matter in the same way it did 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah, I just want to add, a kind of a self, it's not a disclaimer, but as I remind people, I actually had a career before the National Survey of Student Engagement. That came about 25 years into my academic work. But there is a thread of continuity, I think, in that, because I have, as I look backwards, certainly not planned in that kind of way, I've tended to focus on policies, programs, practices that make a positive difference. Whether it's the kind of campus culture that encourages high levels of involvement on the part of students, and we did the Involving Colleges project back in the late 80s and early 90s. That too was looking at high-performing institutions and the language we use today. Well, you may be disappointed, as the listeners may be disappointed. I don't think the ways students engage in educationally purposeful activities. This is my definition of engagement. Until we discover that what makes for good learning changes, I don't think we're going to see what matters in terms of engagement changing. What I mean by that, I want to underscore educationally purposeful. You can, if anyone dares, read both volumes of the Pasquarella and Terenzini, How College Affects Students. We get more sophisticated and more nuanced in terms of our understanding about good practices But that list, the list, for example, that Art Chickering and Z. Gamson developed out of a number of different retreats at Wingspread in Racine, Wisconsin, those 7 good practices in undergraduate education, we can extend that list. But the things that are on that list continue today to feed the high performance on the part of students and the desired outcomes. Student-faculty interaction in a substantive manner, a high quality, timely feedback, interactions with peers around problems and issues and topics, and there's a little bit longer list than that. But these are the things that the engagement surveys and other surveys as well, the College Student Experiences Questionnaire that I inherited from Bob Pace at UCLA back in the early 90s. These tools are intended to measure in a kind of a general way how students spend their time. And what we know is that the more quality and effort students expend on the things that matter to their learning, the more they benefit from the undergraduate experience. This was Sandy Astin's primary thesis as well, with his involvement theory. So surely we'll learn more about how technology perhaps is changing the way students benefit from the undergraduate experience. But I think a key part of even the technologically infused innovations and interventions will demand, if they make a difference, they'll demand that students are investing a considerable amount of time and energy in what we know from decades of research matters to their learning. And toward the end of all of this work, the experiences that are going to make the biggest difference for every student is the extent to which we can design programs and practices that require, and I mean this in a very strong, straightforward way, require students to reflect on their thinking and their experiences in real time, which I submit is an unnatural human act. Most students, most people do not routinely kind of mediate their own kind of thinking as they are moving through a day. This is learned, and we get better at it as we get more practice. And there are 2 other pieces that are really key here, I think, to our world and our students today, and that is they get many, many opportunities to apply what they're learning in real-life circumstances. We see this with the high-impact practices that we've been studying these last few years. The reason that employers strongly prefer students who've had an internship or an extended community engagement project, so they actually demonstrate, they have concrete evidence, if you will, that they can actually do some of the things they've learned. And then finally, key to every student's success post-college is going to be how well they can continue to integrate the new ideas and new experiences that they are encountering with what they've done prior. So this reflection, application, integration, this trio, if you will, I think are really, really key to preparing students today for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, speaking of integrating new ideas into their experience, can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you are working on right now? What kinds of things are taking up your time and energy?
But most of my time, when you get to be old, you don't really have a lot of time to work. You have to do other things, so understand that. But most of my time is devoted to the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. You read that off the top. It's an institute that we created in 2007, driven, in fact, by the Spellings Commission. Some of you have read about that, remember it, when the U.S. Department of Education Secretary put together a blue ribbon panel to look at essentially what was wrong with American higher education. And one of the things that they kept repeating was that we were in an industry, higher education, that knew less about itself, about its core business, teaching and learning, than any other industry, given whatever its core business might be. So we knew that as we approach the next Higher Education Reauthorization Act, and we're in that time period now, colleges and universities simply had to have better information about how their students were performing. And so NALOA was set up to be kind of if not a watchdog, a mirror on the industry in terms of what institutions were learning about their students' learning. And so we created an institute that would be supportive of, helpful to institutions to provide resources where they could turn to see what the best practices in student learning outcomes assessment would be. And then we've done a variety of other things. We've now been charged with by Illumina Foundation, which developed a few years ago something called the Degree Qualifications Profile, a framework that outlines the proficiencies that some people claim, well, a lot of people agree, should really be the standard for student outcomes. That is, every undergraduate should be able to know and do these particular behaviors and proficiencies and have this knowledge base. Just as an aside, many other well-developed countries with fairly sophisticated higher education systems have what are called qualification frameworks. That is, the way you judge the performance of an institution or a country in terms of its higher education system is the extent to which students leave university with the proficiencies that the university claims students need, right? And you put that in a framework, well, now you have something that all institutions can use in common to not just determine, not necessarily how well they're performing vis-a-vis other institutions, but whether they're in fact delivering on what it is they say they are trying to do. So we've been charged, as I said, with helping institutions both discover and use the degree qualification profile for a variety of different things. I won't go into the details here. And about 500 institutions so far in the last couple of years have experimented with this in the reform of general education or toward curricular mapping, something we could talk more about if you want. And we've also enlisted the help of DQP coaches, that is experienced faculty and administrators who have, as I said, a good experience in terms of creating change on campuses. And so they're available to work with institutions that want to use the DQP. Let me just mention one other piece about this, and that is we've become convinced, again, a very simple idea. This is especially important when we think about what institutions do to assess student learning. The best assessment in terms of what, and most useful, meaning most consequential, occurs at the point of contact between teachers and students, or between learning experiences and students. And most of those take place in a classroom, lab, or studio. So we've gone back to the simple premise that the best data one can obtain in terms of whether students are learning what they need to know and do is to design assignments that specifically require or induce students to demonstrate those outcomes. Meaning, what I do in my classroom now should be directly tied to one or more of the proficiencies that some framework, whether it's at the institution or the individual program, decides. And it is there where you can determine whether, in fact, students are getting out of the university experience what they need. We have relied most of the time on what one of my colleagues, Peter Ewell, calls an exoskeletal approach to assessment. And that is, you design a tool at an abstract level, and then you administer it to students around the university and assume that you're getting a reading on authentic student learning. And that just doesn't happen. Moreover, what does an individual faculty member do with a number at the institutional level that may or may not reflect their students? Well, I'm getting maybe too deep in the weeds here, but the point is we are we are now helping conduct what we call assignment design workshops. Actually, we use the word charrette, which comes out of the architectural educational experience, where people come together for a day and brainstorm best practice. And so we invite, we've done now 4 of these, and we invite 20, 25 faculty to bring their assignments into the room and then show them, demonstrate what they're trying to get, and then they get feedback from their colleagues about how to improve that assignment. And what's been fun about this is that faculty members who've gone through that process are now going back to their own campuses and creating these kinds of assignment design workshops on their respective campus. So that we're convinced that if you want to know how well students can write, this is going to be a big surprise. Look at their writing in the context of the classes they've taken, right? And these ideas are connected to a number of other things that we've learned, we've seen happen over the last 4 or 5 years. The use of rubrics have spiked at institutions everywhere, and that is a tool to measure authentic student learning. Rubrics that can be applied to different kinds of learning and different kinds of learning situations. The Association of American Colleges and Universities, that many of your listeners, maybe all know, back a few years ago, developed a set of 16 rubrics under a project they called Value, all caps. I think it's Value. I can't remember now what it stands for, but it has caught fire nationally, and this is all to the better because not only can rubrics help us better understand how well students are doing, students, when they look at the rubric, they have a clear idea of the kind of learning they're supposed to be doing.
Well, thank you.
I also continue to futz around with the engagement stuff as well, and I could spend more time talking to you about high impact practices, which also is something that has caught fire in the last 4 or 5 years. So if you want to talk about that, we can, but I've thrown down long enough.
No, but it's all really interesting information.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely appreciate the opportunity to learn a little bit more about your background and the work that you're currently doing. Moving forward to talk a little bit about this year's Dalton Institute's theme. It's related to higher education's role in fostering ethical leadership and moral commitment. Without giving away too much from the remarks you might have prepared for your keynote, can you briefly share with us your thoughts on higher education's role in fostering leadership and morals?
What is, I think, odd about this topic is that we even need to discuss it. You don't have to go back very far, but we can go back to the beginning of higher education in this country, which was all about fostering morals and leadership. Perhaps not as we think about leadership today, but being having an opportunity to develop oneself into a prominent, responsible citizen who would enrich as well as tend to the commons. I mean, that's how, of course, the colonial colleges got started, or why they got started. Now, that's a long, long time ago, and many things have changed since then. But if you pick up, a college catalog, almost every place, whether it's public or private, denominational or non-denominational college, says something certainly about fostering leadership. Now, they don't all use the word moral, but they might use being civically responsible or some other substitute for that phrase. So what has been disturbing is how little of it we see. Now, it happens in pockets. The Dalton Institute is a good example, but most institutions today have some sort of leadership training program, right, for undergraduates. But it's only for a select few, relatively speaking. So, and where you most want to see leadership today, we seem to have a vacuum. And by that, I mean, at the presidential and provostial levels, too few people willing to speak out in plain language about what matters to their institution and what should matter to all of us. So there is a role modeling chunk of this. Some argue, I have some colleagues who will argue, well, you know, if the institution doesn't offer a degree in it, then it shouldn't be in that business. So we tend not to offer a degree, for example, in moral development. So there are institutions that will offer a degree somewhere that kind of nip around the heels of leadership. But it's an odd circumstance when you say if an institution doesn't value it enough to offer courses in it, then it's not the responsibility of the institution. I think, I'm not sure this was a big part of public skepticism about universities, but as you know, there's been plenty of it these last 5 or 10 years. We are still, I think, in the plus range in terms of being an societal institution that's viewed as helpful and promising and necessary. But I think the leadership vacuum is starting to take its toll on how people outside of the academy perceive us. So those are pretty abstract words, but just to kind of put a fine point on it, we've got to do much better, and we need to hold one another more accountable for doing the right things in the right way. And this, of course, is where we get crosswise with one another because we don't today agree on what the right things are, and we've become so sensitive to the language in a given circumstance that in another time or another circumstance, that language would have been interpreted very, very differently. Let me just give you a close to home example. What's going on at the Claremont College out in California now 3 weeks ago, where the dean there, Mary Spellman, made a comment about students not fitting the Claremont mold. And what she meant by that was, we have got to do better here at Claremont, making sure that this is a welcoming campus for all students. That's what Mary Spellman meant. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is Mary Spellman's a former student of mine. And she doesn't have a bigoted cell in her body. And of course, there now have come other students subsequent out to make that same statement. You know, you don't know Mary Spellman if you think what she meant by that was certain students don't belong here. What she was saying was exactly the opposite. And now, because of such circumstances, we find ourselves in situations where we are afraid to say the things we believe out loud. I don't have a solution to this, but I can say that until we figure out what we believe and why we believe it and what it means for betterment, individual, campus, societal, we're not going to make much progress on this front.
Yeah, those are incredibly impactful insights. We thank you for sharing them with us. We are running just a little bit short on time, and so we're going to wrap up with the last few questions here. Thinking about the Dalton Institutes that you have attended here in Tallahassee in the past, do you have any advice for first-time Dalton Conference goers?
Well, the same advice I'd give to anybody going to an outstanding professional development opportunity. You know, spend as much time as you can with colleagues and getting to know them. I mean, what will make the Dalton Institute most impactful is what happens subsequent to the Dalton Institute. People making connections, maintaining those connections, deepening those connections. Now I don't have a recipe for how one does that, but obviously showing up for the sessions would help.
obviously.
And yeah, it's all about engagement, right? But actively participating, you know, trying to frame in your own mind's eye, what questions, what else do you need to know about this? And posing them, whether you get a chance to do that in the formal session or afterwards with a presenter or afterwards with some of the people who were in that session. So I'm going back to my kind of reflection application. How am I going to use this? I almost always start when I'm on a campus saying to people, the time together we have today is a gift, right? And so you can put all the other things kind of to the side right now. What you need to be doing is interpreting the ideas that we're going to be talking about here today and figuring out in real time how you're going to put those to work, or some of them, not all of them, to work in the next day or 2 or 3. What do you have to do differently, individually and with your colleagues? And if that becomes kind of a template for how people move through the Dalton Institute, I think it will be a much richer, or could enrich the experience. But hey, you're going to be with a number of like-minded people, and it's going to be fun. It will be fun as well as, well, no one said education shouldn't be fun, but it will be fun as well as, I think, instructive.
Well, Dr. Koo, I can honestly say that one of the things I'm looking forward to most of this Dalton is meeting you in person and getting to hear your keynote remarks. Thank you again so much for your time and thoughtful remarks today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Just thinking a bit about what you've had an opportunity to express with us, did you have any other thoughts or anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up for this afternoon?
Well, I've told you more than I know for sure, so I probably ought to stop here. I have to say, though, I remember the last Dalton Institute, which was the 20th year. That was back in 2010. And there was a panel that included Sandy and Lena Aston. Lena, as many of you know, passed away not too long ago. Art Chickering, who's been a frequent presenter, participant at the Dalton Institute, and Art Levine, who for years was president of Teachers College. That was a fun panel, mostly because of the kibitzing we did during the panel. Kind of, quiet asides to the person sitting next to you. And I have to say, I'm really delighted that one of the featured presenters at this coming 2016 Dalton Institute is Jamie Washington. And I'm going to take full credit for everything that Jamie says and knows, because he's also a former student.
Well, thanks again to all of you who watched along or submitted questions via Twitter. As a reminder, this broadcast will be archived on YouTube and can be accessed via the Jon C. Dalton Institute channel or on the Character Clearinghouse website, characterclearinghouse.fsu.edu. We are trying to get as many 2016 Dalton Institute keynote speakers as possible to hang out with us, leading up to and perhaps even during the conference, so stay tuned for updates about those. On behalf of Dr. George Koo, Josh Davis, and myself, we thank you for tuning in today and look forward to seeing you at the 2016 Jon C. Dalton Institute on College Student Values, February 4th through the 6th in sunny Tallahassee, Florida.